The Chicago autumn morning was chilly. Carol Rogers hurriedly prepared breakfast while gazing at the blazing fall foliage through the kitchen window. The cold wind from Lake Michigan rattled the window, announcing winter's approach. "Amy, time to wake up." She called up to her daughter's room on the second floor, but there was no response. Carol frowned and looked at the clock. 7:30 in the morning. She had an important presentation today at the advertising agency where she worked as an art director, and couldn't afford to be late. "Amy." She climbed the stairs and knocked on her daughter's door. A weak voice answered from inside. "Mom, my head hurts." When she entered the room, Amy's face was flushed, and she was curled up under the covers. Carol worriedly placed her hand on her daughter's forehead. There didn't seem to be a fever, but Amy looked unwell. "Another headache. They've been frequent lately," Carol said as she gently stroked her daughter's hair. 10-year-old Amy was usually an energetic and cheerful girl, but she had been feeling unwell more often in the past few weeks. Headaches, fatigue, and occasionally slight fevers. She had been called from school several times. "Do you want to stay home today?" Amy gazed thoughtfully at the ceiling before slowly shaking her head. "I'll be okay. We have a science experiment today. I want to go." Carol smiled at her daughter's courage. She knew Amy was putting on a brave face, but she wanted to respect her wishes. "All right. But if you start feeling worse, contact the school right away." After breakfast, Carol dropped Amy off at school. When they parted at the school gate, Amy suddenly gave her mother a tight hug. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too." As Carol watched Amy walk away, she felt a heavy weight in her chest. 6 years ago, she had ended her 10-year marriage to Thomas. She could no longer endure her ex-husband's infidelity and his violent temperament when drunk. At the time of the divorce, the court had granted Thomas limited visitation rights, but 3 years ago, he had suddenly disappeared. His child support payment stopped, and he ceased all contact with Amy. When she arrived at the office, her colleague Marcus approached her with concern. "You're late again. The client presentation is in an hour." "I know," Carol said tiredly as she sat down and turned on her computer. "Amy hasn't been feeling well." Marcus's expression softened. He was aware of Carol's struggles as a single mother. "Is she okay? Is there anything I can do to help?" "Thank you. But I'll be fine." Carol said this, but she couldn't shake her worries. While reviewing the presentation materials, she thought about her daughter. Amy's tired expression lately. The strange way she sometimes stared into space. There might be a problem. In the early afternoon, Carol's cell phone rang. The screen displayed Lincoln Elementary School. Her heart began to race. Carol Rogers speaking. "Ms. Rogers, this is Jennifer, the school nurse. Amy collapsed with a high fever during class. She's resting in the infirmary now, but she seems quite unwell." Carol felt the blood drain from her face. "I'll be right there." She briefly explained the situation to Marcus and left him in charge of the presentation. 20 minutes later, when she arrived at the school, Amy was lying on a bed in the infirmary. Her face was flushed, and she seemed to be having difficulty breathing. "She has a fever. She's coughing, and her breathing seems labored," the nurse explained. Carol immediately took Amy to a nearby general hospital. The doctor who examined her in the emergency room had a serious expression. "From what I can see in the X-rays, she has a severe case of pneumonia. We need to hospitalize her and begin treatment right away." Amy was given an oxygen mask and taken to the pediatric ward. Carol held her daughter's hand, fighting back tears. Amy looked smaller and more fragile than usual lying in the hospital bed. "It's okay, Angel. Mom's here with you." In the hallway, Dr. Parker, the attending physician, explained the situation. She'll need to be hospitalized for a few days. Intravenous antibiotics and rest are the best treatments. Carol put her head in her hands. I have the final adjustments for an important project starting tomorrow. Dr. Parker nodded understandingly. A nurse named Barbara will be in charge. She gets along well with children and is trustworthy. We'll take good care of Amy. When she returned to Amy's room, a middle-aged nurse with a gentle smile was preparing him for. Hello, I'm Barbara. I'll be taking care of Amy, she said with a warm smile, extending her hand to Carol. Don't worry. She'll be feeling better soon. Carol felt somewhat reassured by Barbara's kindness. She sat beside Amy's bed and held her hand until she fell asleep. The next morning, Carol stopped by the hospital early. Amy still had a fever but seemed calmer as she slept. Barbara gave her a detailed report of Amy's condition during the night. Her fever is coming down. The antibiotics seem to be working. Carol sighed with relief. Thank you, Barbara. I really appreciate it. You have work, right? Don't worry. I'll take good care of her. Carol kissed Amy's forehead and headed to the office. It was a day of racing against project deadlines, but Amy was constantly in the back of her mind. When she called during her lunch break, Amy was awake and answered with a slightly stronger voice. How are you feeling? Carol asked. It still hurts a bit when I breathe, but better than this morning. Amy's voice sounded tired. Hey Mom, are you staying at the hospital tonight too? Carol hesitated. I'm sorry. I need to prepare materials for a presentation first thing tomorrow morning. But Barbara will be with you the whole time. After hanging up, she was still concerned about Amy's tone. She had the impression that her daughter was hiding something. When Carol returned to the hospital that evening, Amy's expression was different from the morning. Her previous brightness was gone, and she looked frightened. What's wrong? Carol sat by Amy's bedside and took her hand. After hesitantly looking around, Amy said in a small voice, Mom, last night, someone came to my room. Carol frowned. Do you mean Barbara? No. Amy shook her head. I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a stranger in my room. It was a woman, but not Barbara. Carol touched Amy's forehead. She still had a fever, but it was lower than in the morning. You might have been seeing things because of the fever. It wasn't my imagination, Amy said, sounding slightly angry. She talked to me. Carol called for Nancy, the nurse. After hearing Amy's claim, Nancy explained with an understanding expression. Some antibiotics can cause hallucinations, and high fevers can have the same effect. Children, in particular, have vivid imaginations. Carol tried to accept Nancy's explanation, but Amy's serious expression bothered her. That night, Carol stayed late in the hospital room and continued working after Amy fell asleep. However, with the presentation deadline approaching, she couldn't make much progress and eventually had to return home. The next day, and the day after that, Amy's pneumonia symptoms gradually improved, but her claims about someone coming at night continued. On the evening of the third day, when Carol arrived at the hospital, Amy had dark circles under her eyes. Amy, haven't you been sleeping well? Amy answered without looking at her mother. I can't sleep because I'm scared. When night comes, they'll come again. Who comes? That woman, Amy said in a small voice. She talks to me in a kind voice. But sometimes, a scary man comes too. Carol became worried. Amy's pneumonia was improving, but she seemed to be under significant psychological stress. When she consulted with Dr. Parker, he referred her to a psychological counselor. It's common for children to feel fear in hospitals. Unfamiliar environments, the sounds of medical equipment, nighttime lighting, these can all cause anxiety. After meeting with the counselor, Carol felt a bit relieved. She was told that Amy's story was a typical anxiety response in children. However, that night, Amy clung to her mother with even more fear than before. "Mom, don't leave. Those people will come again tonight." "What kind of people? Can you tell me more about them?" Carol asked gently. Amy was silent for a while but eventually began speaking in a small voice. "The woman is tall with black hair. She always says, 'Amy, you're such a special child.' But the man..." Amy's voice trembled. "The man says, 'It's almost time.' I don't know what's almost time, but it's scary." Carol embraced her daughter. Amy's story was too specific to be just a hallucination. She decided to consult with Nurse Barbara. The next morning, as Carol was looking for Barbara, an unfamiliar nurse approached her. "Are you looking for something?" "I'm looking for Barbara." "Oh, Barbara has the day off." "I'm Erica, the nurse on duty today." Erica was a young, seemingly kind woman. Carol told her about Amy's nighttime claims. Erica listened with concern but suddenly said as if remembering something. "Speaking of which, there's been a small issue at the hospital recently. Someone lost their staff ID, so security has been tightened." "Staff ID?" Carol felt uneasy. "Yes, we'd have trouble if someone could enter the hospital without authorization," Erica said with a serious expression. "We're especially careful with the pediatric ward. But don't worry. We've increased security guards." Doubt began to grow in Carol's mind. Could Amy's story and the hospital's security problem be coincidentally related? Throughout the day, while working at the office, she constantly thought about Amy. By evening, Carol had made a decision. She arranged to have Marcus handle tomorrow's presentation and decided to stay at the hospital tonight. She explained the situation to the hospital administrator and received special permission. She would be allowed to use a family rest room close to Amy's room. "It's really fine," Erica assured her. "Children have vivid imaginations. But having her mother nearby will give her peace of mind." That night, Carol read a picture book with Amy and sat by her bedside until she fell asleep. When Amy began to breathe deeply, Carol quietly headed to the restroom. But her heart was uneasy. She lay down on the bed in the restroom but couldn't sleep. The clock showed 11 p.m. Carol made a decision. Tonight, she would discover the identity of Amy's visitors. She quietly left the restroom and stood in the dimly lit hallway. The pediatric ward had reduced lighting at night, with only the faint light from the nurse's station to guide her. Carol approached Amy's room door and held her breath. Around midnight, Carol was holding her breath in front of Amy's room. Only the occasional passing of night shift nurses broke the silence that dominated the hallway. The soft nighttime lighting specific to the pediatric ward cast pale shadows on the walls. Just after 12:30 a.m., a small sound announcing the arrival of an elevator was heard. Carol hid in the shadows and watched to see who would come. However, it was only a nurse making her midnight rounds. She passed by Carol's cheek and moved on to the next room. Time passed slowly. Carol nearly succumbed to fatigue and drowsiness several times, but each time she remembered Amy's terrified expression, she regained her focus. Around 2 a.m., she heard faint footsteps. The sound of someone coming up the stairs. Carol's heart began to race. Peering carefully from her hiding place, she saw a woman in a white nurse's uniform approaching from the far end of the hallway. The woman carefully looked around as she walked quietly. She quickly passed by the nurse's station and headed straight for Amy's room. The woman was indeed wearing a nurse's uniform, but something felt off. Carol frowned. The uniform seemed slightly ill-fitting. And her movements lacked the confidence and familiarity typical of hospital staff. The woman paused momentarily in front of Amy's room door, checked her surroundings again, and then quietly opened the door. Carol couldn't suppress her racing heart. An intruder had entered her daughter's room. She instinctively wanted to rush in but restrained herself as if prompted by something. She needed to assess the situation first. Carol quietly approached the door and peeked through the slightly open gap. What she saw made her catch her breath. Inside the room, the woman was sitting next to Amy's bed, gently stroking her hair. Amy remained asleep with her eyes closed, but her expression was peaceful. The woman was whispering something to Amy in a soft voice. "It's almost time, Amy. You're truly a wonderful child. Mommy and Daddy are waiting for you." A chill ran through Carol's entire body. Who was this woman? Why was she calling herself Mommy? The woman's long black hair and slim build matched exactly what Amy had described. As Carol continued to observe, the woman took something out of her pocket. It was a small doll. She placed it by Amy's pillow and smiled. "This is a present for you. A symbol of our new family." Alarms went off in Carol's head. This woman was clearly suspicious. Just then, the woman's expression changed. She suddenly stiffened and looked toward the hallway as if listening. "He's here," the woman whispered to Amy. "See you tomorrow, my sweet child." The woman quickly stood up and moved toward the window. Carol was on the verge of panic but was distracted by heavy footsteps echoing from down the hallway. A man's footsteps. Carol quickly returned to her hiding place. The figure that appeared from around the corner was a man wearing a hospital custodian's uniform. The man was of medium height with broad shoulders, and a small part of a tattoo was visible at his neck. He too was looking around cautiously as he approached Amy's room. Memories stirred in Carol's mind. That build, that walk. Could it be? A terrible premonition grew within her. The man entered Amy's room. Carol peeked through the gap again. The woman was no longer visible. The curtain near the window swayed slightly, but Carol couldn't tell where the woman had hidden. The man approached Amy's bed and stared at her face. When he noticed the doll by her pillow, he smiled faintly. "So Lisa was here," the man muttered softly. He then moved closer to Amy and touched her cheek. "It's almost time, Amy. Let's become a new family. Daddy will take you away." Amy woke up. She looked at the man, confused for a moment, but her expression quickly changed to one of fear. "Who are you?" Amy's voice was trembling. "Don't you remember?" The man smiled, but his eyes were cold. "I'm your daddy." Amy cried out in a trembling voice. "No. Mom. Mom." Carol couldn't bear it any longer. She forcefully opened the door and rushed in. "Get away from Amy." The man turned around. For a moment, shock crossed his face. Carol knew with just a glance, it was Thomas. Her ex-husband, who had disappeared suddenly 3 years ago, was here now. "Carol." Thomas's voice was low and had a dangerous resonance. "I'm calling security," Carol shouted. Thomas quickly moved away from Amy's bed and headed for the exit. Carol tried to stop him, but Thomas pushed her aside forcefully and ran into the hallway. As Carol fell to the floor, she reached for the emergency call button. Amy ran to her mother, crying. "Mom." That man was scary. Carol held her daughter tightly. "It's okay, you're safe now." Alarms rang throughout the ward, and the night shift nurses rushed to the room. Carol instinctively looked down the hallway, but Thomas was already gone. Looking at the window, she saw the curtain swaying in the wind. The window was half open, leading to the emergency stairs outside. Carol couldn't stop her whole body from trembling. If she had been a few minutes late, what would have happened to Amy? Security guards arrived and asked for an explanation. Carol began to speak in a trembling voice. "It's my ex-husband," he tried to. Indescribable fear and anger overwhelmed her. "Amy, trembling in her mother's arms, said in a small voice. "Mom, that doll." Carol looked at the bed. A small cloth doll was placed by the pillow. The doll looked completely ordinary, but what it represented was clearly abnormal. Carol picked up the doll with trembling hands and gave it to the security guard. "Evidence. They were trying to take my daughter." The commotion in the room had drawn other patients and nurses into the hallway. Carol held Amy protectively as they waited for the police to arrive. Carol and Amy were moved to a separate room, where a detailed interview took place. Detective Reed had a sharp gaze despite her calm demeanor. She listened attentively to Carol's story, occasionally taking notes. "Your ex-husband's name?" "Thomas Rogers," Carol answered in a trembling voice. "We divorced 6 years ago, and he's been out of touch for 3 years." "And you reunited with him tonight," Detective Reed confirmed. Carol nodded. Amy sat next to her mother, pressing close to her, trembling with fear. Detective Reed smiled gently at Amy. "Amy, can you tell me a bit more about the woman you saw?" Amy looked up at her mother, and when Carol nodded, she began speaking in a small voice. "She had long black hair and was very beautiful. She always came at night and talked to me. She said we'd become a new family." Amy faltered. "She called herself Mommy." Tension crossed Detective Reed's expression. She turned back to Carol and said in a lowered voice, "We're checking the hospital's security camera footage. Please wait here until the results come in." After Detective Reed left the room, Carol embraced Amy. "That was scary. But you're safe now." Amy buried her face in her mother's chest and cried softly. "That man isn't really Daddy, is he?" Carol's heart ached. "That man was your daddy from before, but he's not your daddy now. A real daddy wouldn't scare his daughter." 30 minutes later, Detective Reed returned. Her expression was serious. "We've checked the surveillance camera footage. Thomas Rogers had indeed been coming and going from the hospital for several days, wearing a custodian's uniform, mainly at night. However," she hesitated for a moment, as if choosing her words, "there's no sign of the woman." "No sign." Carol was surprised. "But I definitely saw her. And Amy has been meeting her every night. We've checked all the surveillance cameras, but there's no sign of the woman you described anywhere," Detective Reed said. "She might have been using blind spots like the hospital's emergency stairs or service elevators." A question arose in Carol's mind. "What about the doll? The doll that woman gave to Amy? We've secured it as evidence. We're taking fingerprints now." At that moment, another detective entered the room. He whispered something to Detective Reed. Her expression changed. "Ms. Rogers, could you tell me a bit more about Thomas? Do you know anything about what happened after he disappeared 3 years ago?" Carol shook her head. "Nothing. His child support payments stopped, and when I tried to contact him through a lawyer, we couldn't find his whereabouts." Detective Reed nodded. "Has he ever been arrested?" "He was once questioned on domestic violence charges. But he wasn't indicted." Detective Reed took a deep breath and said, "We found Thomas Rogers's car in the hospital parking lot. We obtained a search warrant and found some concerning items." Carol leaned forward. Forged ID cards, sleeping pills, and a duplicate of Amy's passport were found. Detective Reed's voice was quiet but weighty. Furthermore, there was an enrollment permission form for an elementary school in Columbus, Ohio, under the name Amy Wilson. The blood drained from Carol's face. "Wilson?" "Yes," Detective Reed nodded. "And we also found this photo in the car's dashboard." She took out a smartphone and displayed an image. It was a photo of Thomas with a young woman. The slim woman with black hair was clinging to Thomas's arm and smiling at the camera. "This woman's name is Lisa Wilson." She and Thomas Rogers were married 3 years ago. Carol gasped. The woman in the photo was exactly the night visitor that Amy had described. Our investigation into Lisa Wilson reveals that she has congenital infertility and strongly desired children, Detective Reed continued. According to her parents, Lisa had been telling people around her for about a year that she would soon become a mother. Suddenly all the pieces connected. Carol made a horrifying deduction. They were planning to kidnap Amy. Detective Reed nodded gravely. That's what it looks like. Judging from the sleeping pills and forged documents found in the car, they were planning to carry it out soon. Amy trembled and shrank into her mother's arms. Carol held her daughter even tighter. We've issued a multi-state alert, Detective Reed said. For both Thomas Rogers and Lisa Wilson. Don't worry, we will catch them. The room was enveloped in heavy silence. In Carol's mind, various thoughts were swirling. Why had her ex-husband resorted to such deranged actions? How had the man she once loved changed to the point where he would try to kidnap their daughter? Mom. Amy's small voice broke the silence. Was I about to be taken away? Carol felt the back of her throat heating up. I'm glad that didn't happen. You're safe now. As morning came, the hospital began to return to its usual vibrancy. Carol and Amy were moved to a new room under police protection. Dr. Parker, Amy's attending physician, recommended a few more days of hospitalization considering the shock from the recent events. When Barbara visited the room, her face showed deep guilt. I'm truly sorry. I never imagined something like this would happen. Carol showed a tired smile. It's not your fault. No one could have predicted this. In the afternoon, Detective Reed arrived. Her expression held a slight relief. We've arrested Thomas Rogers. He was caught at a checkpoint on an Indiana highway. Carol sighed deeply in relief. What about Lisa? She hasn't been found yet. However, her parents' home is under surveillance. She won't be able to run for long. Detective Reed placed a hand on Carol's shoulder. Ms. Rogers, your courage saved your daughter. Many parents dismiss their children's stories as products of imagination. But you listened to your daughter's words and took action. Carol looked at her daughter. Amy was peacefully asleep on the sofa by the window. Her face showed a serenity that hadn't been seen in days. I just did what any mother would do. That night, under the starry sky visible from the hospital room window, Carol sat at Amy's bedside, holding her daughter's hand. Her heart was still trembling with fear, but she also felt a strong relief. It would take time for all the truth to come to light. Thomas's motives, his relationship with Lisa, and how they came to target Amy. Carol gazed out the window and reflected on what family meant. Was it blood ties or love? Thomas was Amy's biological father, but that bond didn't stop him. Conversely, between Carol and Amy, there was a bond too strong for words. It was born from daily small sacrifices and unconditional love. The door to the room opened softly, and Erica peeked in. She smiled gently and said in a small voice, "Good night. You can sleep peacefully now." Carol nodded. Tomorrow, a new chapter would begin for her and Amy. A life of mother and daughter, bound by stronger and deeper love. Happy birthday, Amy. Cheers echoed through the living room of Carol's suburban Chicago home. Friends and family had gathered to celebrate Amy's 11th birthday. Amy smiled shyly as she blew out the candles. A year had passed since that incident. The seasons had come full circle, through the harshness of winter, and back to the gentle autumn. Outside the window, colored leaves danced, announcing the beginning of a new season. As Carol carried plates of cake from the kitchen, she watched her daughter's smiling face. The sparkle had returned to Amy's eyes, and their daily life had regained peace. However, she still occasionally suffered from nightmares in the middle of the night. "Let me help you." With a gentle voice, David stood beside her. He was a client at Carol's advertising agency who had supported her continuously after the incident. Their relationship had gradually deepened, and now they spent weekends together. "Thank you," Carol smiled. As David took the plates, he whispered in her ear, "Amy has really recovered, hasn't she?" That was true. After Thomas and Lisa were arrested, Amy had confronted her emotional wounds with a professional counselor. The first few months were difficult, but Amy showed remarkable resilience. At the trial, both Thomas and Lisa were found guilty. Thomas claimed he just wanted to see his daughter, but the evidence found in their car was undeniable. It became clear that Lisa had mental health issues, and receiving treatment was included as a condition. In the living room, Amy was laughing with her friends as she opened her presents. By her side was Bella, a golden retriever puppy who had become part of the family a few months ago. Bella had started as a therapy dog but was now Amy's best friend and guardian. "This is beautiful," Amy exclaimed, picking up a small silver bracelet. It was a gift from David. He looked at Carol and smiled. After the party ended and friends had gone home, the three of them sat on the swing in the backyard, watching the twilight sky. "Mom," Amy suddenly said. "Today, I wrote an essay about family at school." "Oh, what did you write about?" Carol asked gently. "I wrote that real family isn't about blood ties," Amy said while petting Bella's head. "Family means the people you feel safe with." Carol felt a warmth in her chest. Her daughter's words reflected what she herself had learned over the past year. David quietly put his arms around both of their shoulders. "That's right, Amy." Meanwhile, in the state prison, Thomas stared at the wall of his solitary cell. His relationship with Lisa had collapsed, and she was receiving treatment in a different facility. He often reflected on his actions and was overcome with deep regret. With no visitors, he was completely alone. From Carol's house window, the three figures were illuminated by the setting sun. They were talking about something, occasionally laughing. Amy was teaching David something, and he was listening intently. As night fell, Carol was reading a bedtime story in Amy's room. When she finished, Amy took her mother's hand and said with a serious expression, "We'll always be together, right?" Carol looked straight into her daughter's eyes and nodded firmly. "Always together, Angel. I promise." It wasn't just words, it was a vow with her life at stake. Carol kissed Amy's forehead and left the room. Meeting David in the hallway, he gently embraced her shoulders. "Are you okay?" "Yes," Carol smiled. "Now I really am." Outside the window, the autumn wind rustled the trees, announcing the arrival of a new season. Accepting the past as the past, they had begun to walk forward. Protected by the bonds of a true family.